Okay, well, good morning, guys. Um, if you're like me, you've been closely following the situation in the Ukraine. For all my fellow TCKs out there, I'm sure we all feel like global citizens and like this is definitely our business. And I personally do stand with Ukraine. I do think that what is happening is wrong. It's a war crime. I think that it is never right to attack another country. It is never right to ignore the sovereignty of another nation. It is never right to redraw borders with military force. I don't think it's right. And I think that it is very inspiring seeing what's going on over there as far as the Ukrainian people and how they're standing up and they're saying no and standing up to a bully. And it really, if you just look at it from that point of view, like I said, it's very inspiring. And I absolutely hope that everything stops soon and that lives are saved and that this just stops. Absolutely. But the more that I've watched the coverage and the more that I've read up on and learned about the history of Russia and the Ukraine and the Soviet Union and the European Union and NATO and all of these other things. Because, of course, if you watch one YouTube video, then it pulls up one from 10 years ago where somebody was talking about something that's relating to those countries and to everything else. And so I've kind of ended up down a rabbit hole. But all that to say, I think it's very important to maintain perspective because as much as what is happening cannot possibly, in my mind, be justified at all, I can see how it got here. Do you know what I mean? I can see how it got here. And also, we as citizens of the United States of America, I think, often feel very justified in our opinions and our worldviews and very kind of superior. Maybe not. But if you look at the situations from the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there is one thing I grew up learning that I still think works today. And even though I've rejected most of my religious upbringing, I will say there's a verse somewhere that says something about ignoring, pointing out the mote, the tiny speck in your neighbor or your brother's eye, while ignoring the giant beam going through your head. I mean, the United States is not blameless. We've had imperialist tendencies to be very nice about it for decades. We may have gone about things slightly more subtly, but we have certainly toppled governments and made moves that were in the interests of certain corporations for the transportation of bananas, let's say, and many, 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 many other situations. So, speaking from experience as an American that was essentially ejected from another country under the false allegation that our mission organization was CIA and that the country of Venezuela no longer trusted us. I mean, we weren't CIA, but that's actually not to say that our mission organization hadn't been infiltrated by CIA. And I can't personally prove that there was no CIA or any other American organization working underneath the radar in Venezuela. I mean, we do have a history of that. So, perspective. How did the situation get to the point that it has? to be fair, as narcissistic and nutso as the Russian president appears to be right now, we all start somewhere. And as crazy as his demands that NATO stop expanding sounds, according to one of the videos I saw, his demands were that NATO stops expanding and that the Ukraine doesn't join the European Union and that all these other things. And they weren't met, and so now he's pissed off. Well, I didn't know this until this morning, but we did actually make a promise at one point to Russia that NATO would not include any more members. Now, I'm someone who in the last few days was like, yeah, let the Ukraine join NATO. Why can't we? Like, go ahead. It makes a little bit more sense now. I still think that they should be allowed to join any organization that they want to. And if they want to be part of the European Union and they don't want to be considered Soviet nation, then go for it. But I can understand how the shifting and the balance of power is a lot more complex than it seems from the outside. Once again, war is war, and I don't condone war, ever. But I think it's important to know history, because in a lot of different ways, once you forget history, you're bound to repeat it. So the United States is a global player. We're a very large power on the stage. But at some point along the way, we've been breaking promises. At some point along the way, we fostered mistrust between our nation and Russia. After the Soviet Union fell, there were discussions. Hey, let's be friends. Let's at least be partners. I think it's in the interest of certain entities that the world remain somewhat divided, and that's why it does. Let's just say that when the United States wants something to happen, they make it happen. If you look at history, there's always a way they found to make it happen. Sometimes it's public and sometimes it's not so public. So when things happen, I mean, the butterfly effect, I feel like I'm all over the place, but this is my thought process, and this is how, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying, look, I think that as citizens of this world, and we need to stick together and we need to stand up and we need to say, no, this is wrong. We're not going to stand for this anymore. No, you can't bully them. No, you can't bomb their civilians. No, you can't lie. No, it's not okay to do this. No, it's not okay to do that. And as a collective people, I'm sure that we all agree that the Russian people and the Ukrainian people deserve our sympathy and our empathy and our cooperation. But as a country, the leaders are the ones who make the decisions. The leaders are the ones who make the moves. And apparently we elect those leaders, although more and more in this country, it is starting to feel like whether we elect you or not, you find a way to power. And this is coming from someone who actually voted for the current president. Yes, I did. I'm sorry, I couldn't vote for the imbecile. I couldn't. And I'm sure he's a lot smarter than he sounds and looks. I feel like it's a ploy, but it just rubs me the wrong way. Politics are complicated. And I think they are complicated on purpose to keep the average person who is so busy just trying to survive out of it. But if we stay out of it, then... So for instance, this is, like I said, all over the place, but this is all politics. My local city has just redistricted our voting districts, right? Based on the census data. And while the majority of our residents that live here, work here, have to drive on the roads here, have to put our children in the schools here, are much more liberal minded, and the surrounding rural areas are much more conservative, they have redistricted us so that no matter how many people we've got here in this little space that have to live and work here, and no matter the fact that most of the rural people don't really come into our space or have to live with these rules, they now get a huge portion of voting power for our representatives. So a representative of my city is actually now going to be a representative of a huge cross section of people who absolutely have no vested interest in what we have to live and work here. They're completely removed, for the most part, from the city. They don't have to live here. They don't have to work here, or very rarely. It's very little the amount that it affects them. It doesn't affect their property taxes. It doesn't affect a lot of things. But they get to make the decisions for us. How does that seem right? It doesn't, to me. But these are things that happen when we're busy looking at other things. So I'm sorry, I was stuck on maternity leave and/or I was distracted with a brand new baby. But while that was happening for my life, and I wasn't involved as much on the political spectrum as I usually try to be, they redistricted and they forced it through. No matter how many people came to the town meetings and said, no, we don't want this, they forced it through anyway. And now we are stuck filing a lawsuit or trying to do something to say, no, this isn't representative of us. A representative is supposed to be a representative, but a representative of mostly people who have no say in our, no stake in our city, are going to have the voting power to decide who's in charge because they want a Republican majority, I guess. I don't know. I'm not particularly Republican or Democrat. I think that it's important that I be represented. And more, it feels like the Republican Party, even though I was always a Republican before, is gone bonkers. So no, I don't really want to be part of that group anymore. But I will vote for a Republican if he's got decent views, or she. But like I said, most of them seem to be slightly bonkers right now. So what am I supposed to do? Anyway, all that to say, I think it's important to maintain perspective, pay attention to what's going on the small scale. We can absolutely be with Ukraine and be for them and be supportive and everything else and be against war. But don't forget that while big things are happening on the world stage, there's almost always something going on at home that's quietly going through. It's almost like a distraction. Maybe it's on purpose, maybe it's not. But try to remember not to be distracted by the world at large, because that's when things are happening at home that are actually going to affect your everyday life. And if you don't pay attention, it happens before you know it. And then it's a whole lot harder to regain ground than it is to maintain it. Just like Ukraine. As long as they can maintain their ground, it's a whole lot easier to win than it is if they have to try to take it back. Sometimes world events and politics and elections are very depressing to me. But I'm trying to remain positive and just say, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to elect a Republican this time, but we're going to have to elect a Republican that represents our interests. That's okay. I can swap parties. I don't care. But you have to be representative of your district, your entire district. And what's happening here at home is just as important as what's happening there, because we decide, or we're trying to take back the ability to decide who our leaders are, because they're the ones who make the policy, who make the agreements, who potentially piss off other countries, who then end up spiraling down into narcissistic rebellion against the entire world and put all of us at risk. So remember that the powers that be at the top are there because the powers that be at the lowest levels were originally chosen by us, or not chosen by us not participating. Pay attention at home just as much as you pay attention abroad. Anyway, it's just something I was thinking about this morning. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.